If you're watching this video, you might want to be a writer because, the title and all that. Okay, so you want to be a writer, you'd like to write, you think about writing, but how do you know if you are a writer? Some of you are looking at this video thinking, man, this guy's been playing the oud and suddenly he's talking about writing. How many writers do you think out there who have lives outside of writing and do things other than write? How many writers do you think qualify for that? All of them, right? Everybody who writes does something else and has other facets of their lives. It's just that in the case of my little YouTube channel here, you guys have gotten a hold of the other part first. But this is going to be a music channel, and it's going to be a writing channel because that's me. So, writers write. That's what they say. If you think about writing, but you don't ever write, you might be like people I know that think about playing piano, but don't ever play piano. Think about riding a bike, but don't ever get on the bike. They like the idea, but they're not actually engaged with the pursuit of the endeavor. Writers write. Ultimately, that's how you know. But it can be a little confusing because we all write. I mean, if we're on the internet, we're writing emails, we're writing messages. We might be writing posts that say something meaningful on some bit of social media somewhere. We might be writing videos like this one. How do you know if you're a writer? How do you know? Is there other ways to tell? Okay. You might be a writer. Here's number one. This is my little list. I've got 7 things how you might know if you're a writer. So here's number 1. You might be a writer if you dislike movies. Yeah. You might be a writer if you dislike movies. Not all movies. That's not what I mean. But if you see a movie and you get to the end of the movie and you think, nah, that didn't work. And I don't mean that it offended you in some way, right? Like we've all seen movies that were too gross or too, whatever. I'm talking about you get to the movie and the end happens and it all wraps up and you think that wasn't good enough. That wasn't good enough. Yeah, we got where they said we were going, but it didn't satisfy me. You might be a writer if that happens to you now and then when you watch something. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, you might be a writer if you read a lot of books. To be perfectly honest with you, writing and reading go together. I saw a chat somewhere where somebody said something like, I want to be a writer, but I don't like to read. I don't like to read, but I want to write books. Can I write books if I don't read? One doesn't want to be discouraging. One wants to encourage anyone one comes across for, in principle. But reading and writing goes together. Yeah, I think that my interest in writing began as a result of reading. And before I read, I didn't really think much about writing. And I think it's also true that the more you read, the more you start to think, yeah, maybe I could write something like this that I really like. So you might be a writer if you read a lot of books. You might be a writer, this is number 3, if you're in a conversation with somebody and you get your point across, but you walk away from it and you're not happy. Like, yeah, I said what I wanted to say and he agreed with me or I persuaded him or whatever, but I could have said it better. You might be a writer if that happens to you. That's number 3. Okay. You might be a writer, number 4, if you like to reread books that you enjoy and you like to rewatch movies that you like. It's like you get to that point where the one character says something and it sets the whole thing off. And then you like to watch over and over again and see how this part leads to this part and the pieces of the plot come together like a puzzle. And when you get to the end, it's this inevitable, satisfying thing. It couldn't have happened any other way because you enjoy seeing the process of the story resolving itself, and you enjoy thinking about how the different elements were constructed to do that. Watching the plot happen, not just seeing your favorite movie star or the effects or the music, but actually seeing the pieces come together. You might be a writer if you feel that way. Okay. You might be a writer if you invent characters in your head. This is strictly for sane people. If you're, you know, if you're inventing people in your head in order to talk to them, that's a different issue. That may not be writing. That may be something else that needs therapy. But if you invent people in your head and then you think, I would like to create a world around them, a story, you might be a writer if you invent characters. You might be a writer if you, this is another part of this, if you savor people, if you meet people and you notice things that they do and things that they say, and you think to yourself, yeah, I could take these things from this person and put them into a character someday. You might be a writer if you think that way. Okay. You might be a writer if you like to tell stories. That's kind of an obvious one. But, I mean, not everybody tells stories. If you have thoughts in your head like, I would really like to write a fantasy novel, or I'd really like to write a TV series about somebody that lives in, I don't know, Prague, right? You might be a writer. Of course, you could be all those things and still actually not be a writer. You could do all of those things. And maybe you could not do some of those things and still be a writer. Because I said might, right? I use that word might. You might be a writer if you do these things. How do you know you're definitely a writer? If you want to be a novelist, but you spend all your time making posts on social media about politics, and you never actually get around to outlining, much less beginning, then you may not be a novelist. You're a novelist, you're a writer of novels if you write novels. If you don't, you're not. That's the easy thing. But beyond that, you're a writer if you've written a story and you've gotten to the end and you're not happy with the ending and you want to fix it and you make it better. If you have that impulse, that's definitely a writerly impulse. You're definitely a writer if, having written one story, you want to write the next story. Okay. So, that's how you know if you're a writer. But what about being an author? That's kind of an interesting question. A writer, an author. We kind of use these terms interchangeably, like they're the same thing. They're not the same thing. There are many, many more writers in the world than there are authors. I know a guy, a friend of mine, good friend. He's got a father who's written 2 novels. This guy, his father is educated, English literature degree. He's written 2 novels. Apparently they're controversial. I don't know. I haven't read them. But he is not trying to publish them, and he's not going to try to publish them. He's made this decision. I wrote the novels, and I'm happy with them, and I'm not going to publish them, right? So he is not an author. He is a writer. He's not an author. An author is someone who pursues publication, right? So an author is someone who says, I've written this, and I'm going to make it available to the world. I want other people to read what I've written. And before you get into writing, you might think that everybody feels that way. It's not true. There are lots of writers that are not authors and are not ever going to be authors. And that's okay, you know. But they're not the same thing. That's the point. You're definitely an author if you write like you mean it. Now, what does that mean? I'm going to write military fiction set in the early 1800s in the Royal Navy, and I'm going to run a character through all the experiences of a junior officer in the Royal Navy in that time period, because I want to write fiction around highly realistic events that give the reader a comprehensive picture of what it was like to command a Royal Navy warship in the final decades of the Age of Sail. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that basically describes Patrick O'Brien's thing. Patrick O'Brien, the author, right? If you have something specific that you want to say and you're going to stick to the point and you're going to build that up, consistency and focus and thinking, at least taking into consideration, what is the marketplace? What is happening in publication these days? What are things people are writing about right now? I'm going to write what other people are writing about because I think I could write that. That's an author way of thinking. I'm going to not write what anybody else is writing about right now because I don't want to write that. I want to write something different. That also is thinking like an author. Okay. So, hope that's helpful.